Flight 447 was 37 minutes into its route from Chicago to Miami when the first terrorist made his move toward the cockpit. 183 passengers watched in horror as coordinated attackers revealed weapons and began taking control of the aircraft. Flight attendant Rachel Carson was supposed to follow standard hijacking protocols and comply with their demands. Instead, she did something that shocked everyone who survived. She moved through the cabin with tactical precision that could only come from someone who had spent 12 years as a Federal Air Marshal, hunting people exactly like the ones now threatening her passengers. When evil takes to the skies, it sometimes discovers that the protectors were already on board, disguised as the very people passengers take for granted. Before we dive into this high-altitude story of aviation security, federal training, and the marshal who never stopped protecting travelers, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like Rachel's prove that guardians often hide behind service smiles, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who defend us in ways we never noticed. Rachel Carson had been working as a flight attendant for Delta Airlines for exactly 3 years, 4 months, and 11 days. To the thousands of passengers she had served, she was the professional crew member who demonstrated safety procedures, served beverages with a smile, and somehow always remained calm during turbulence that left other people gripping their armrests in terror. What passengers didn't know was that Rachel's seemingly supernatural ability to remain composed during aviation emergencies came from 12 years as a Federal Air Marshal, where she had been trained to identify and neutralize terrorists threats while operating undercover on commercial flights across the world. Rachel had joined the Federal Air Marshal Service in 2008, shortly after completing a degree in criminal justice and specialized training in aviation security. The Air Marshal program was one of the most demanding assignments in federal law enforcement, requiring agents to spend hundreds of hours in the air while maintaining constant vigilance for threats that could materialize without warning. For 12 years, Rachel had flown over 2 million miles on commercial aircraft, always armed, always watching, always prepared for the possibility that ordinary passengers might reveal themselves as extraordinary threats. She had learned to identify suspicious behavior patterns, to assess aircraft layouts for tactical advantages, and to engage hostile subjects in the confined space of an aircraft cabin without endangering innocent passengers. Rachel's training had included advanced marksmanship in aircraft environments, hand-to-hand combat in confined spaces, and crisis management techniques specific to aviation emergencies. Air marshals were required to be expert marksmen who could engage threats with precision that prevented bullet penetration of aircraft hulls, while simultaneously managing passenger panic and coordinating with flight crews who might not be aware of their presence. During her marshal career, Rachel had responded to 14 potential hijacking situations, arrested 23 individuals who had attempted to bring weapons aboard aircraft, and coordinated responses to aviation security threats that ranged from mentally unstable passengers to sophisticated terrorist operations. Her success rate in preventing aviation incidents had earned her recognition within the federal law enforcement community, but the psychological toll of constant vigilance had eventually led Rachel to seek a different career path. Rachel's most significant case had occurred in 2018, when intelligence agencies received credible threats about a coordinated attack on multiple commercial flights. Rachel had been assigned to a flight from New York to London that was identified as a potential target. During the 8-hour flight, Rachel had identified and monitored 3 passengers whose behavior patterns suggested coordination and potential hostile intent. The situation had escalated when one of the suspects had attempted to access the aircraft's cargo hold, apparently seeking to retrieve weapons that had been smuggled aboard through corrupted ground crew personnel. Rachel had been forced to reveal her identity and arrest all 3 suspects while coordinating with the flight crew to implement emergency security protocols that prevented what investigators later determined could have been a catastrophic aviation disaster. The incident had required Rachel to use every aspect of her Air Marshal training: threat identification, tactical arrest procedures, aircraft security management, and passenger crisis communication. The successful resolution had prevented a potential hijacking, but the operational stress and constant travel demands of Air Marshal service had convinced Rachel that she needed to find a way to remain in aviation while reducing the psychological pressures of federal law enforcement. When Rachel transitioned from Air Marshal to flight attendant, she had deliberately chosen to continue working in commercial aviation as a way to use her expertise while serving passengers in a more positive capacity. For 3 years, the strategy had worked. Rachel found satisfaction in helping travelers, ensuring their safety and comfort, and using her aviation knowledge to provide exceptional service without the constant stress of threat assessment. The passengers and crew on Rachel's flights knew her as unusually competent during emergency situations. When medical emergencies occurred, Rachel could assist with advanced first aid procedures that went beyond standard flight attendant training. During severe turbulence, Rachel's calm demeanor and authoritative instructions helped passengers remain composed. When unruly passengers created disturbances, Rachel could de-escalate situations with communication techniques that seemed almost professional. What they couldn't see was how Rachel unconsciously maintained situational awareness during every flight, how she automatically identified potential security vulnerabilities and threat indicators, or how she kept herself in the physical condition required for federal law enforcement operations. Rachel maintained her marksmanship skills at a local shooting range, kept current with aviation security protocols through online training, and maintained contacts within the Air Marshal community who could provide intelligence about emerging threats. Flight 447 was a routine Tuesday afternoon departure from Chicago O'Hare to Miami International, with Rachel serving as the senior flight attendant on a Boeing 737 configured for 183 passengers. The passenger manifest had been reviewed by TSA security personnel and had revealed no obvious security concerns. Though Rachel's training had taught her that the most dangerous threats were often the ones that appeared completely normal, Rachel had noticed the 3 suspicious passengers during the boarding process, not because they displayed obvious threatening behavior, but because their movement patterns and seat selections suggested coordination rather than coincidence. The subjects had boarded separately, carried minimal luggage, and positioned themselves in locations that provided tactical advantages for controlling key areas of the aircraft. The first subject was David Martinez, seated in 12A, near the forward galley and with clear sight lines to the cockpit door. The second was Ahmed Hassan, in 23F, positioned near the aircraft's center of gravity where movement would have maximum effect on flight stability. The third was Robert Chen, in 34C, near the rear galley and with access to the aft lavatory where weapons might be concealed. Rachel's Air Marshal training had taught her to identify these patterns, and she had discreetly communicated her concerns to the captain during the pre-flight safety briefing. However, without specific intelligence indicating an imminent threat, aviation security protocols required continued observation rather than preemptive action. The attack began at 2:47 p.m., approximately 37 minutes after takeoff, When the aircraft had reached cruising altitude and passengers had settled into the relaxed phase of flight that hijackers typically chose for their operations, Martinez was the first to move, approaching the cockpit door with what appeared to be a ceramic knife that had been concealed in his carry-on luggage. Rachel's federal training activated before her conscious mind could process the full scope of the threat. This wasn't a single disturbed passenger or a spontaneous incident. This was a coordinated hijacking attempt by individuals with tactical training and sophisticated planning. Rachel immediately activated the aircraft's emergency communication system while positioning herself to engage the closest threat. Hassan moved simultaneously toward the center of the aircraft, revealing a weapon that appeared to be constructed from components that had been smuggled aboard separately and assembled during flight. Chen began moving toward the flight attendant stations, apparently seeking to control communications equipment and prevent crew members from coordinating with ground-based security agencies. Rachel realized that she was facing a textbook coordinated hijacking by subjects with apparent military or terrorist training, operating with weapons that had evaded airport security screening, and implementing tactics that suggested extensive planning and preparation. The 183 passengers aboard Flight 447 were now hostages in a situation that required immediate federal-level response capabilities. Rachel's first priority was preventing the terrorists from reaching the cockpit, where they could take control of the aircraft and use it as a weapon against ground targets. Using movement techniques learned during Air Marshal training, Rachel approached Martinez while he was attempting to breach the cockpit door, which had been reinforced after the 9th of November, but could still be compromised by determined attackers with appropriate tools. "Sir, please return to your seat," Rachel said, using the calm, authoritative tone that air marshals were trained to employ before revealing their law enforcement status. Martinez turned toward Rachel, knife visible in his hand. "Stay back. We are taking control of this aircraft." Rachel recognized the tactical moment when negotiation transitioned to enforcement action. Using techniques learned during 12 years of Air Marshal operations, Rachel engaged Martinez with hand-to-hand combat methods specifically designed for aircraft environments, where conventional law enforcement tactics had to be modified for confined spaces and the safety of innocent passengers. The engagement lasted less than 30 seconds, with Rachel using aircraft equipment and interior structures to gain tactical advantages while neutralizing Martinez without compromising aircraft safety or endangering nearby passengers. Rachel's disarmament of Martinez was so professional and efficient that most passengers didn't initially realize they had witnessed a federal law enforcement action. With the first threat neutralized, Rachel immediately moved to engage Hassan, who was attempting to take hostages among the passengers in the center section of the aircraft. Rachel's Air Marshal training included advanced passenger protection techniques, designed to minimize civilian casualties while engaging multiple threats in the confined environment of an aircraft cabin. Federal Air Marshal, Rachel announced, revealing her law enforcement authority while engaging Hassan. "Everyone get down and stay in your seats." The announcement transformed the cabin atmosphere from confused terror to organized emergency response. Passengers who had been frozen by the hijacking attempt now understood that they were being protected by someone with federal training and authority, and they began following Rachel's instructions with a compliance that comes from recognizing legitimate law enforcement commands. Hassan attempted to use passengers as human shields, but Rachel's training included tactical methods for engaging threats who employed such tactics. Using precision techniques that had been developed specifically for aircraft combat scenarios, Rachel was able to neutralize Hassan while ensuring the safety of the civilians he had been threatening. The engagement with Chen occurred near the rear galley, where he had been attempting to access the aircraft's communication systems and disable the crew's ability to coordinate with ground-based security agencies. Chen was armed with what appeared to be an improvised explosive device, designed to threaten aircraft structural integrity if his demands were not met. Rachel's Air Marshal training included bomb threat response procedures, and she immediately implemented protocols for managing explosive devices in aircraft environments while simultaneously engaging the individual who was threatening to use them. The situation required Rachel to use every aspect of a federal training: threat assessment, explosive device management, tactical engagement, and passenger evacuation coordination using techniques that had been classified during her Air Marshal career. Rachel was able to separate Chen from his explosive device while neutralizing him as a threat to aircraft safety. The improvised bomb was secured using aircraft equipment and positioned in a location where any potential detonation would minimize damage to critical aircraft systems. By the time Flight 447 was diverted to the nearest airport with appropriate security facilities, Rachel had successfully neutralized all 3 hijackers while maintaining aircraft safety and protecting all 183 passengers. The entire engagement had lasted less than 12 minutes, but Rachel's federal training had prevented what investigators later determined could have been one of the most catastrophic aviation terrorist attacks since 9/11. The emergency landing was coordinated with FBI aviation security specialists who boarded the aircraft to secure the scene and process the evidence. The lead FBI agent, Special Agent Torres, immediately recognized the professionalism of Rachel's tactical response and the sophistication of the terrorist operation that had been thwarted. "Outstanding work, Carson," Agent Torres said as federal agents secured the hijackers. That was textbook Air Marshal crisis response. "What's your current assignment?" Rachel looked around the cabin, where passengers were being interviewed by federal agents and the aircraft was being processed as a crime scene. For 3 years, she had successfully transitioned from federal law enforcement to civilian aviation service, but the hijacking attempt had made concealment of a background impossible. "Former Federal Air Marshal," Rachel replied, 12 years with the service. Currently working as a flight attendant for Delta. Agent Torres nodded with obvious respect. "We are going to need a full debrief on your tactical response and threat assessment. This was a sophisticated operation, and your intervention prevented what could have been a major aviation disaster." The investigation that followed revealed that Rachel had thwarted a coordinated terrorist attack that had been planned for over 18 months by a cell with connections to international extremist organizations. The terrorists had used advanced techniques to smuggle weapons aboard the aircraft and had planned to use Flight 447 as a weapon against ground targets in Miami. Rachel's immediate recognition of the threat indicators, her tactical response capabilities, and her ability to neutralize multiple armed subjects while protecting civilian passengers had demonstrated the continued value of Air Marshal training even after leaving federal service. Her actions had saved 183 lives and prevented what could have been a catastrophic terrorist attack. The passengers aboard Flight 447 learned that their survival had depended on someone whose background they had never suspected. Rachel had spent 3 years serving them coffee and demonstrating safety procedures while carrying skills that could protect them from threats they hoped never to encounter. Delta Airlines offered Rachel promotion to their corporate security division, where her federal training could be used to enhance aviation security protocols across their entire fleet. Rachel accepted the position while maintaining her flight attendant certification, allowing her to continue serving passengers while contributing to aviation security in ways that drew on her unique expertise. The Federal Air Marshal Service invited Rachel to return to federal service, but she chose to remain in the private sector while accepting consulting positions that allowed her to train other aviation security personnel in threat recognition and tactical response techniques. Rachel's experience had proven that former air marshals could continue contributing to aviation security even after leaving federal employment. Most importantly, Rachel's actions led to enhanced security protocols that improved threat detection capabilities across the commercial aviation industry. Her analysis of the hijacking attempt provided intelligence that helped prevent similar attacks and contributed to the development of new security technologies that could identify the types of weapons the terrorists had used. Rachel Carson never sought media attention for her actions aboard Flight 447. The technique she had used involved classified federal methods that couldn't be discussed publicly, and the terrorists she had neutralized were part of ongoing international investigations that required operational security. But the 183 passengers who walked away from Flight 447 represented a victory against terrorism that most Americans would never know had occurred. Flight 447 was returned to service after extensive security modifications. And Rachel continued her career in aviation security with the satisfaction of knowing that her federal training had found new purpose in protecting travelers who trusted commercial aviation to keep them safe. She had proven that the most effective aviation security often came from people who understood both service and protection as essential aspects of the same mission. So I ask you, have you ever flown with someone whose calm professionalism suggested training that went far beyond standard customer service? Someone whose presence made you feel safer without quite understanding why? Share their story in the comments, because here at the Human Stories, we believe that our safety at 35,000 feet often depend on guardians whose capabilities we never fully understand. Thank you for watching. If Rachel's story moved you, please subscribe and share this video. Help us honor those who carry their federal training into civilian aviation, ready to deploy tactical skills when evil threatens innocent travelers, proving that the most important security measures are often the ones we never see in action. Until next time, remember, the person serving your coffee at 35,000 feet might once have been the one hunting terrorists at the same altitude. Sometimes the most effective protectors are hiding behind the most helpful smiles.